Today I work at the Thomas Wolfe Memorial in downtown Asheville. We're a state historic site, one of 27 of them in North Carolina, and this one the farthest west of all of them and probably the tiniest. I have the pleasure of answering the phone here, Thomas Wolfe Memorial. This is Tom speaking. People are generally pretty polite. Nobody hangs up on me. And I had to be in my job description at least 6'3" in order to come to work at that great house. We're all about Thomas Wolfe. My presentation today is short, but really there's nothing short about Thomas Wolfe, either his works or himself. He grew to 6'6½", 250 pounds, by many still considered to be North Carolina's most famous author. He is the subject of a movie this summer called Genius, which we've been waiting for the last year. Fitzgerald, Hemingway, they've all got their turns on the big screen in Hollywood, but this is going to be Thomas Wolfe's turn. He's the son of William Oliver Wolfe, born in 1851 at York Springs, Pennsylvania. W.O., he could remember seeing Confederate soldiers walk past his father's farm on their way to the battle at Gettysburg, and it's a story that he would tell often. His role in it will get richer and richer every time he tells that story, and Thomas Wolfe wrote that his father should have been an actor. W.O. recites Elizabethan poetry and passages from Shakespeare. His mother, Julia Elizabeth Westall, a third-generation mountain girl, born in Buncombe County in 1861 and raised in severe poverty in the years surrounding the Civil War. She's a young woman looking to get ahead in life. In 1884, you could find Julia selling books door to door in downtown Asheville to earn money to buy lots in the downtown. She wants to speculate in real estate, and she sees owning property as a way to create a legacy for herself that had never been afforded her by her family. She heard that W.O. Wolfe could read, and she's going to go right on into his shop in 1884 and try to sell him a couple of books. He said she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen before. And on their second date, he asked her to marry him, said he needed someone to take care of him. After a 4-month courtship, he's very persistent and quite a gentleman. Julia agrees that they both need someone to take care of them. They were married in January 1885, and together they built W.O. Wolfe's monument and tombstone shop on Pack Square in Asheville. He sold architectural ironwork, he did architectural stonework, and Thomas Wolfe writes that his father, a frustrated artist, he loved the art of carving in stone. He always wanted to carve the perfect faces of angels. He never developed the craft to that level, but he imports angels. This is the angel in Hendersonville. Together they go to W.O.'s house on Woodfin Street, and they're going to have these 6 children. Actually, their first child, a little girl named Leslie, dies of cholera at 9 months old, but then followed by 6 more. And Thomas Wolfe writes that everything his father put in the ground grew with abundance. His father's home, a warm place, a place of abundance in his life. Contrast to the house that he's going to have as his memorial. Thomas Wolfe was born October 3rd, 1900 in Asheville. He's definitely the baby of the family. 6 years separated him and the next child in the family, and Julia wants to keep him a baby as long as possible. But she does put all of her children to work at an early age. Tom's first job selling the Saturday Evening Post on the streets of Asheville for a nickel. He was 8 with those long Lord Fauntleroy curls and big brown doe eyes. That boy could sell 150 magazines a week out there on the street. Before he's 6 years old, his mother buys a boarding house on Spruce Street called Old Kentucky Home, and she'll bring Thomas Wolfe there with her. He wrote that he grew up in this house of vagabond, that he had gained another roof, but that he no longer had a home. The house, a beautiful Victorian home built in 1883. Thomas Wolfe sitting there on the front stoop of the house shortly after his mother buys the house. Thomas Wolfe wrote that his mother never gave him his own room in this house, that he had to move from room to smaller room, that he didn't even have a blanket that he could call his own, that he wouldn't have to give up to a boarder newly arrived in the house. And he doesn't have much nice to say about his experience here. He said his father called this house the murderous, bloody barn. It's full of strangers. It's always cold inside this house. But today, very well preserved, and much like Thomas Wolfe would have remembered it as a boy. Thomas Wolfe got head lice at 9 years old, and his mother had to cut those long curls that broke her heart. He started attending school at 5 years old, and she could see her baby slipping away from her. The local librarian telling his father that boy comes to the library every day after school and has read more books than any other child in Western North Carolina. She doesn't know that he's avoiding going back to his mama's boarding house and that he's really embarrassed to live there. W.O. has to dig down. His friends are telling him that boy's surely going to be a lawyer someday. So he's going to send Tom to a private prep school in Asheville after the 8th grade. His teacher there at the North State Fitting School, Margaret Roberts, focuses Tom's reading on classic literature and poetry. He called her the mother of his spirit. And it's a nice part of his story that he had a teacher who saw genius in him at a very young age and helps inspire him. The boarding house, although Thomas Wolfe doesn't have much nice to say about living there, he certainly must have benefited meeting people from all over the United States and wondering what life was like outside the mountains of Asheville. And a lot of women stayed there. It was considered more appropriate for women traveling to stay in a boarding house in this day than in a hotel. Because you know those hotels, they have lobbies where strangers can come and go. Your reputation is at stake over there. Thomas Wolfe wrote that not all the ladies in his mother's boarding house were necessarily ladies, though. At age 15, his father packs him up and sends him off to the State College, University, North Carolina, Chapel Hill, for 4 years. And W.O. thought again that Tom was studying the law, that he was surely going to be our governor someday, a United States senator. But Thomas Wolfe falls in love with the Carolina Playmakers and starts to write plays while he's at school. When he first arrived there, World War I is about to kick off, and the school becomes an army camp with student military training, and all of the big shots on campus leave, and Thomas Wolfe has an opportunity then to join fraternities and different societies, becomes the editor of the Tar Heel magazine while he was at the University of North Carolina. And again, he falls in love with playwriting and joins the Carolina Playmakers. And his first play was called The Return of Buck Gavin, about a mountain outlaw. And there were all girls in the class except for Thomas Wolfe, and nobody volunteers to play Buck Gavin. So his professor says, "That's going to be your part, Tom." And there's Thomas Wolfe as the outlaw Buck Gavin at the University of North Carolina. He comes home from college, graduated, and tells his papa that he wants to write plays and that he'd like to go to Harvard next for a while. And nobody in the Wolfe family terribly excited about that idea. And in his father's mind, there's no such thing as a writer from Asheville, North Carolina. Writers are mythical people who live overseas somewhere like Shakespeare. But his mama gives him the money to go to Harvard. He's 19 years old. He leaves Asheville to the north for the first time, and he attends George Baker's 47 workshop at Harvard, and he writes pieces and parts of plays. He attends the workshop for 3 years. One of his better plays was called Welcome to Our City, and it was based on a small town in the mountains of North Carolina. His plays, though, 10 scenes, over 30 characters. They run for 3 hours. Then, although Thomas Wolfe rewrites and rewrites the plays, he's not willing to shorten them, and eventually he can't sell his plays, and he's heartbroken. He's not going to be a playwright. He goes to Europe for the first time in 1924, one of 7 trips he'll take there. And on the return voyage in 1925, he meets Aline Bernstein, 18 years his senior, an accomplished set designer in the theater, and she's going to become his patroness and mistress for almost the next years. And she has faith in his writing and convinces him to attempt to write a novel instead of taking his time to try to continue to write plays that he can't sell. She finds him an agent, and his first book, which he called Oh Lost, winds up on the desk of the famous editor Maxwell Perkins at Charles Scribner's and Sons. And Max Perkins then becomes his next father figure and his friend and mentor for the next years. He's going to take Oh Lost and crunch it down about 90,000 words and reorder it a little bit and make him change the title. He said, we can't sell a book called Oh Lost. And so they choose Look Homeward Angel. And Look Homeward Angel is going to come out in October of 1929. It's going to sell 14,000 copies in its first run, which was very good for a first-time author in that day. And it's going to put Thomas Wolfe on the literary map in the United States. He's going to get a Guggenheim Fellowship in 1930 to begin working on his next book. He thought that Look Homeward Angel was going to be a great success and make him famous in his hometown. People bought it eagerly in Asheville, and then they began to realize that they were seeing themselves in the novel and their neighbors. And Thomas Wolfe had unflattering things to say about them and secrets to share. And Thomas Wolfe said that he got death threats from home from his first novel, which is a very autobiographical account of growing up in Asheville. Over 200 characters in the book can be identified as people that he knew here in Asheville. Again, he gets a Guggenheim Fellowship in 1930, goes to Europe for the next year to write his next book. Doesn't get much done over there. Thomas Wolfe doesn't really know how to write a book from beginning to end with a plot and a chronological approach. He writes about his experience, throws his work into a big orange crate, and it begins to pile up all around him. And in 1933, Max Perkins says, you're done, takes his manuscript, and they created Of Time in the River and a book of short stories. 8 years, Thomas Wolfe will exile himself from the city of Asheville, gets the courage to come home in 1937, and he finds that the people who were mad in 1929 are pretty much okay. Some of them are a little upset they weren't in that second book Of Time in the River, and everybody wants to know when he's going to finish the third book and what he's going to look like in the third book. But sadly, he never finished it. He exhausted himself trying. And in 1937, he's going to head out west on a little vacation. And he's going to meet a travel writer out there and tour the national parks up and down the Continental Divide. And he's not going to get the rest that he needed on his vacation. He's going to wind up in Seattle with the influenza, which turned into pneumonia, and that opened a tubercular lesion dormant in his lung, and he's going to die just 18 days short of his 38th birthday. His funeral at the First Presbyterian Church in Asheville. He left behind a manuscript 1.2 million words, 10 times longer than the average novel, and he wasn't done. He really didn't know when he would ever be finished or how to make a book out of that work, but he did give it to his editor before he went out west for a sneak peek. And his next editor, a man named Edward Aswell, is going to inherit that manuscript, and Aswell had convinced the publisher, Harper's Brothers, to give Thomas Wolfe a $10,000 advance for a third book, and he's got nothing but a giant pile of paper, the skeleton of a book. He's going to carve it into 3 more books, The Web and the Rock, You Can't Go Home Again, and an anthology kind of short stories, a book called The Hills Beyond. Today, we don't find a lot of people who read Thomas Wolfe anymore. You can find him in Riverside Cemetery, a wonderful place to visit in Asheville, great park setting. On his gravestone, an inscription, one from Max Perkins, his first editor, The Last Voyage, The Longest, the Best. The next contributed by Edward Aswell from The Web and the Rock. The family couldn't make up their mind which one to use. All the Wolves had trouble coming to decisions in life, and so they put both of the inscriptions on Tom's grave. And again, the Thomas Wolfe Memorial, guided tours through the day. We have a wonderful visitor center there with a 22-minute film about the life of Thomas Wolfe. Some great tour guides, volunteers, and part-time staff and students who will greet you there and tell you a lot more than I've been able to tell you today about the life of Thomas Wolfe. But I will take questions about Thomas Wolfe today if you have any. And again, I want you to look for that movie called Genius this summer. It's supposed to be limited release, coming out in June sometime, based on a book by Scott Berg called Max Perkins, Editor of Genius. And it's going to be all about Perkins and Thomas Wolfe and how they worked together to create their first 2 books. And Jude Law is playing Thomas Wolfe on the big screen. He came to visit the house just 2 summers ago, had read Look Homeward Angel, and wanted to take that walk through the house and the places where Thomas Wolfe had been a boy to help understand the characters that he became. Questions? Comments? Who's read Look Homeward Angel? I've got a bunch of questions. How do we start? Lost was printed in 2000 from Thomas Wolfe's original manuscript, and again about 90,000 words longer than Look Homeward Angel, but stands alone very well. Yes, ma'am. Certainly, the question is why aren't people reading Thomas Wolfe today? It's very complex. We have shorter attention span now. Reading Thomas Wolfe is a commitment. You don't get it done on a weekend. They're hefty books. And unfortunately, we've become an overly politically correct society, and so there are parts that were influenced by the culture of his day that some people might find somewhat obscene or offensive today as well. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, did his father ever have pride in Thomas Wolfe as a writer? His father got to see some of the poetry and some of the pieces that he wrote for the Tar Heel magazine, and one of Thomas Wolfe's poems printed in many newspapers in the South, and his father clipped it and carried it in his wallet during his lifetime. His father died in June of 1922, and Thomas Wolfe writes about the death of his father at the old Kentucky home in his second book of Time in the River. Thomas was at Harvard at the time. Ma'am. Yes, the angel in the cemetery at Hendersonville is one that historians believe is the one that Thomas Wolfe describes in his book, Look Homeward, Angel. It was sold from his father's monument shop in 1906. And in Look Homeward, Angel, Thomas Wolfe writes that the local madam bought the angel for the grave of one of her girls who had passed away. It became Thomas Wolfe's first short story called Angel on the Porch, published in Scribner's magazine. Caused quite a controversy because the angel actually sits on the grave of a Methodist minister's wife.
You are watching BRCC TV, the education channel.